Shaka Zulu's early years are shrouded in both myth and reality, blending the complexities of his heritage and the cultural norms of his time to shape a man destined for extraordinary power. Born in 1787 to the Zulu chief Senzangakona and his wife, Nandi, Shaka's beginnings were far from auspicious. His mother, Nandi, was from the Langini clan, and the union between her and Senzangakona was controversial from the start. Shaka's birth was marked by the disgrace of being born out of wedlock, which led to early rejection. Shaka was never fully accepted by his father's family, and his early years were marked by harsh treatment and neglect, which would leave a lasting impact on his character. However, this environment of neglect and marginalization would come to play a pivotal role in shaping his future. Shaka's relationship with his father was strained, as Senzangakona had multiple wives and children, and Shaka was not the heir apparent. Despite the lack of recognition, Shaka's mother, Nandi, played a crucial role in his upbringing. She was fiercely protective of him, and her influence was a cornerstone of his early years. Nandi's strength and resilience became a model for Shaka, helping him survive the turbulence of his youth. Though ostracized by his father's family, Shaka's early experiences with rejection and hardship instilled in him an unyielding sense of ambition and self-reliance. The culture of the Zulu people at the time was one of great significance, with complex traditions, social structures, and expectations. The clan system was paramount in the daily lives of the Zulu people, and Shaka's early life was rooted in these values. From an early age, he was expected to demonstrate the strength and skills required of a young Zulu man. The early experiences of hardship he faced were not unique to him. Many others in his community were forced to navigate similar challenges. However, it was Shaka's ability to endure these trials, rather than succumb to them, that would set him apart. His resolve to overcome adversity became a defining feature of his character, one that would later fuel his rise to power. As Shaka grew older, his status within the Zulu tribe remained that of an outsider. Despite being the son of a chief, he was not seen as an heir to the throne, and his position was marginal. Shaka's early years as a young man were spent in relative obscurity, far from the royal court. He became a skilled warrior during his time away from the Zulu heartland, and this period of exile would prove crucial to his development. During this time, Shaka's reputation began to grow, particularly through his association with other warriors and chieftains in the region. His time with the Mthethwa, a powerful neighboring clan, under the leadership of Dingiswayo, marked a significant turning point in his life. Dingiswayo recognized Shaka's potential and took him into his service, allowing him to prove his mettle in battle. This experience was transformative, not only in terms of Shaka's military abilities, but also in terms of his understanding of leadership and power dynamics. It was under Dingiswayo's tutelage that Shaka began to refine the military strategies and tactics that would later make him famous. His time with the Mthethwa exposed him to the complexities of tribal warfare and the importance of strategic thinking. Shaka was quick to adapt and learn, distinguishing himself as a brilliant strategist and a ruthless fighter. Dingiswayo's mentorship had a lasting impact on Shaka, shaping his future approach to leadership and conflict. Shaka's commitment to learning the intricacies of warfare was driven by a deep desire to one day return to the Zulu Kingdom and take his rightful place at the top of the clan hierarchy. As Shaka's reputation grew, so too did his ambitions. He became known for his fearlessness and innovation on the battlefield, earning the respect of his comrades. His time with the Mthethwa was marked by both triumphs and brutal conflict, and it was during this period that Shaka began to develop his unique style of warfare. He abandoned many of the traditional methods used by Zulu warriors in favor of more aggressive tactics, including the famous buffalo horns formation, which would become a hallmark of his military strategy. This change in approach was part of Shaka's broader vision for transforming the Zulu Kingdom into a powerful and unified force, capable of challenging the might of other tribes in the region. Shaka's ability to see beyond the confines of traditional Zulu warfare was a critical factor in his rise to power. He recognized the need for a disciplined, organized army that could adapt to changing circumstances. His military genius was not just in his ability to fight, but in his understanding of how to maintain control over large numbers of men and resources. His innovations were not limited to the battlefield. They extended to the way in which he structured his forces and organized his society. Shaka's reforms went far beyond military tactics and into the very heart of the Zulu way of life. He would demand loyalty, discipline, and unwavering commitment from his warriors, ensuring that his kingdom would rise to unprecedented levels of power. The turning point in Shaka's life came with the death of his father, Senzangakona, in 1816. Despite the fact that Shaka had not been recognized as his father's heir, the death of the chief opened a power vacuum within the Zulu Kingdom. This was the moment Shaka had been waiting for. With Dingiswayo's backing, Shaka seized the opportunity to return to his homeland and challenge his rivals for the throne. The support of the Mthethwa chief, Dingiswayo, proved invaluable, as it allowed Shaka to build a powerful army capable of taking on any resistance. Shaka's return to the Zulu Kingdom marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would lead to the eventual unification of the Zulu people under his rule. Shaka's rise to power was swift and violent. He quickly disposed of his rivals and established himself as the leader of the Zulu Kingdom. His brutal methods of consolidating power, including the use of terror and ruthlessness, became part of his legend. But his early years, marked by rejection and hardship, had prepared him for this moment. His experiences had shaped him into a man capable of achieving greatness, and his desire for power was fueled by a deep sense of both personal ambition and a desire to see his people united and strong. The emotional landscape of Shaka's early years is one of resilience, survival, and transformation. Born into a world of hardship, rejection, and conflict, Shaka's journey from marginalized outsider to the ruler of a powerful kingdom is a testament to his relentless ambition and the impact of his mother's influence. His early experiences were not just formative, they were defining. They set the stage for the extraordinary rise of a leader who would reshape the history of Southern Africa and leave a legacy that would echo across generations. The hardships Shaka faced in his youth did not break him. They forged him into a king. His rise to power was the culmination of years of struggle, learning, and ambition, all shaped by a deep-seated desire to prove himself to the world and claim his place in history. Shaka's formative years as a warrior were crucial to his rise to power, and the lessons he learned during this time would shape him into the military mastermind he would become. After spending his early years in the shadow of rejection and marginalization, Shaka's time away from the Zulu Kingdom proved pivotal. His journey as a warrior began under the tutelage of Dingiswayo, the leader of the Mthethwa, a neighboring tribe. Dingiswayo's recognition of Shaka's potential marked the beginning of his transformation from an outcast into a formidable force. Under Dingiswayo's guidance, Shaka was exposed to a new way of thinking about warfare, leadership, and military strategy. This period was not only formative in terms of Shaka's fighting skills, but also in shaping his understanding of power dynamics, leadership, and the importance of loyalty. Shaka's ability to adapt quickly to the Mthethwa's military tactics demonstrated his sharp intellect and ambition. While many warriors adhered to traditional methods of fighting, Shaka saw the limitations in these tactics and began to experiment with new strategies. He was an innovator, someone who was constantly seeking better ways to achieve victory. This drive for innovation and perfection would be one of the defining features of his rule. Shaka's military mind became known for its ruthless efficiency, and he quickly became one of Dingiswayo's most trusted and feared warriors. The Mthethwa army, which was among the most powerful in the region, taught Shaka the importance of discipline, coordination, and fearlessness. But it was Shaka's unrelenting desire to outdo his rivals that would ultimately make him a legend. Shaka's exposure to the Mthethwa's fighting style, which emphasized tight formations and coordinated attacks, gave him the tools to think beyond traditional tactics. He soon realized that in order to defeat stronger opponents, he would need to create a military force that was faster, more flexible, and more cohesive. Shaka began to develop his own innovative techniques, many of which would become staples of his military campaigns. One of his most significant contributions to warfare was the introduction of the short, stabbing spear, known as the assegai. Unlike the longer, throwing spears used by most other African tribes, the assegai was designed for close combat. This innovation gave Shaka's warriors a significant advantage, allowing them to fight more effectively in tight formations and gain an edge in hand-to-hand combat. Beyond weaponry, Shaka's approach to military organization was revolutionary. He recognized that a successful army required more than just skilled warriors. It needed to be a unified, disciplined force that could operate seamlessly in battle. He established strict codes of conduct and training for his warriors, requiring them to be in peak physical condition and prepared for battle at all times. Shaka's forces were divided into age-regimented units, with each regiment tasked with mastering specific combat skills. This method of organizing the military created a sense of unity and loyalty among the soldiers, and it made the Zulu army a formidable force that could adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. Shaka's military innovations did not stop with weaponry and organization. He also developed new tactics that would go on to become legendary. One of his most famous strategies was the buffalo horns formation. In this formation, Shaka would divide his army into three parts: a central unit, which would serve as the main force, two flanking units, which would encircle the enemy from both sides, much like the horns of a buffalo, and a reserve unit, which would hold back to deliver the final blow. This tactic was designed to overwhelm the enemy by creating confusion and forcing them into a position where escape was impossible. It was a highly effective strategy, and its success was a testament to Shaka's military genius. In addition to his military innovations, Shaka also introduced psychological warfare to his campaigns. He understood the power of fear and how it could be used to control both enemies and his own people. Shaka's reputation for cruelty and brutality became well known across southern Africa, and he used this to his advantage. He employed terror as a tool, striking fear into the hearts of his enemies even before battle began. Shaka's enemies often feared his army more than the actual fight itself, knowing that to fall into his hands would mean certain death. This psychological warfare played a key role in Shaka's success, as it often led to defections and surrender without a fight. Shaka's early years as a warrior and military leader laid the foundation for his future success. The time he spent with Mthethwa helped him develop a deeper understanding of warfare, but also taught him valuable lessons about loyalty, leadership, and the importance of strategy. His rise within the Mthethwa ranks was a testament to his abilities and his desire to prove himself. However, Shaka's ambitions extended far beyond his service to Dingiswayo. As Shaka's reputation grew, so too did his hunger for power. He had no intention of remaining in the shadow of another leader for long. His experiences with the Mthethwa had given him the skills he needed to build his own kingdom, and he would stop at nothing to achieve his goal. Shaka's time with Mthethwa ended abruptly when Dingiswayo was killed in battle, and Shaka found himself at a crossroads. With the death of his mentor, Shaka saw an opportunity to seize power for himself. Returning to his homeland, Shaka quickly set about consolidating his power within the Zulu Kingdom. His rise to the throne would not be easy, as he faced resistance from rival factions within the Zulu tribe. However, Shaka's military prowess and ruthless tactics gave him the edge he needed to take control. His time as a warrior, under Dingiswayo's tutelage, had prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead. Now, armed with his own vision and an unwavering determination, Shaka was ready to claim the throne and build an empire. The expansion of the Zulu Kingdom, under Shaka's leadership, began almost immediately. Shaka used his military innovations and strategies to defeat neighboring tribes, consolidating power and expanding his territory. His methods were brutal, and he showed no mercy to those who resisted him. This period of conquest was marked by rapid territorial expansion, and Shaka's army became feared throughout the region. His success in battle was largely due to his ability to outthink and outmaneuver his opponents, often using psychological warfare and surprise attacks to gain the upper hand. The kingdom Shaka built was one of strength, unity, and fear, and it would leave an indelible mark on the history of Southern Africa. Shaka's military genius was complemented by his ability to unify the Zulu people. He established a centralized system of governance that brought together disparate clans and tribes, creating a single, powerful kingdom. His rule was characterized by strict discipline, and he demanded loyalty from those who served him. His vision for the Zulu Kingdom was one of strength and unity, and he worked tirelessly to achieve it. However, Shaka's rule was not without its challenges. His growing power made him many enemies, both within and outside the Zulu Kingdom, and his methods of rule, though effective, were often brutal and unforgiving. As he expanded his territory and built his empire, Shaka's legacy as a powerful, ruthless leader began to take shape. Shaka's early life as a warrior and military leader set the stage for his eventual rise to power, but it was his ability to adapt, innovate, and lead with both vision and brutality that would make him one of the most formidable figures in African history. His experiences with Mthethwa and his exposure to new tactics and strategies helped him craft a military force that was unmatched in its time. Shaka's ambition, determination, and ruthlessness ultimately transformed the Zulu Kingdom into a dominant power in southern Africa, and his legacy would live on long after his death. Shaka's ambition began to take a more concrete shape as he sought to unify the disparate tribes of southern Africa under his banner. His early ambitions were rooted not only in a desire for power, but in the need to forge something greater, something that would rival the existing powers of the region. The Zulu Kingdom had been fragmented, and its tribal divisions had made it vulnerable to external threats. Shaka's vision was not only to unify the Zulu people, but to create an empire strong enough to defend itself against its enemies and expand its influence. To achieve this, Shaka recognized the necessity of military dominance, but he also understood that the foundation of his rule had to be built on a unified kingdom with a singular purpose. This early quest for unity required both diplomacy and force. Shaka's tactics of warfare were often brutal, but his ability to broker alliances and deal with rival chieftains was equally important. As he began to consolidate his power, he reached out to various tribal leaders, offering them the chance to join him and benefit from his vision. For some, this was a strategic move to align themselves with a rising power. For others, it was an opportunity for self-preservation, as the increasing strength of Shaka's military threatened to overtake them if they resisted. Shaka used both coercion and persuasion to achieve his aims, promising benefits for those who joined him, while threatening destruction for those who opposed him. This was not a kingdom built on goodwill, but rather on the acceptance of power through either collaboration or force. In his efforts to unify the kingdom, Shaka understood the importance of reordering the Zulu people's social and military structures. He reformed the way warriors were organized, building on his experiences with Mthethwa. Under Shaka, the Zulu military became a highly disciplined and structured force. The traditional clan-based units were replaced with age-regimented groups, creating a sense of unity and loyalty that transcended tribal lines. This system allowed for better coordination during battles and ensured that each warrior was equipped with the skills needed to fight effectively as part of a larger, cohesive force. Shaka's commitment to military discipline went beyond just training. He enforced strict codes of conduct, requiring his warriors to maintain peak physical condition and be prepared for battle at a moment's notice. One of Shaka's most significant innovations was the establishment of a standing army. Whereas many other tribes relied on warriors who were called upon only during times of conflict, Shaka's forces were always ready for battle. This constant state of readiness gave Shaka's army a considerable advantage over its enemies. The warriors were trained not only in the art of combat, but in the psychology of war. Shaka understood that battles were not won solely through physical strength, but also through the mental toughness of his soldiers. The psychological aspect of warfare became central to Shaka's military philosophy. His warriors were trained to be both physically and mentally resilient, able to endure the harshest conditions and remain loyal to their king even in the face of adversity. Shaka's reforms extended beyond the battlefield and into the very fabric of Zulu society. He instilled a culture of obedience, discipline, and loyalty that would permeate every aspect of the kingdom. His people were expected to live by the same strict standards that governed his warriors. This sense of unity and shared purpose was critical to Shaka's success. As he conquered neighboring tribes and expanded his territory, the Zulu Kingdom became a powerful, centralized state. It was not just the might of Shaka's military that made the kingdom formidable. It was the unity and loyalty that he forged among his people. The strength of the Zulu Kingdom under Shaka was rooted in this social cohesion, which he cultivated through both force and careful governance. Shaka's methods were not without their challenges. The unity he sought to create through military strength came at a cost. Many of his early campaigns were marked by severe brutality. Shaka's reputation for cruelty and his willingness to use terror as a tool of war became well known across the region. His enemies feared his army not just for its strength, but for its reputation for savagery. Shaka used fear as a weapon, and it worked. The mere prospect of facing Shaka's forces often led to surrender without a fight. But this brutality also bred resentment. While some of Shaka's subjects were loyal and willing to fight for his vision, others grew disillusioned with his reign of terror. Shaka's approach to leadership was absolute and unyielding, and those who did not adhere to his strict expectations were punished severely. Despite these challenges, Shaka's quest for power continued to accelerate. His military success in uniting the Zulu people gave him a sense of invincibility. He now looked beyond his own kingdom, eyeing the neighboring tribes of southern Africa. His ambition was no longer confined to consolidation, but expanded to expansion. The Zulu Kingdom, under Shaka's rule, would grow exponentially as he sought to bring other tribes into his fold. Each campaign was marked by strategic brilliance, and Shaka's ability to outmaneuver his opponents became legendary. His rise to power was not simply a result of superior military tactics. It was also due to his understanding of how to inspire fear and loyalty in equal measure. His mastery of psychological warfare allowed him to manipulate his enemies and solidify his position. As Shaka expanded his kingdom, his military innovations became more pronounced. The famous buffalo horns formation, which had become a key aspect of his strategy, allowed him to defeat larger and more established armies. The central force, the head, would charge directly at the enemy, while the flanks, the horns, would encircle them from both sides, leaving the enemy with little room to maneuver. This strategy proved highly effective in multiple battles, and its success solidified Shaka's reputation as a brilliant tactician. His military innovations also included the development of more efficient weapons, including the short, stabbing spear, or assegai, which became synonymous with his forces. The assegai allowed his soldiers to fight at close range, giving them an advantage in hand-to-hand combat. Shaka's territorial expansion came at a price, however. As he conquered neighboring tribes, he imposed a strict system of governance on them, demanding tribute, soldiers, and loyalty. For those who resisted, the consequences were swift and brutal. Shaka's conquests were often marked by mass slaughter, and entire communities were either forced to join his empire or wiped out. While this expansion allowed Shaka to create one of the most powerful kingdoms in southern Africa, it also sowed the seeds of resentment among the people he ruled. His reign of terror, combined with his ability to outthink and outfight his enemies, made him both a revered and feared figure. His empire, while powerful, was built on a foundation of fear and loyalty, and this combination of strength and cruelty would become a defining characteristic of Shaka's rule. By the time Shaka's empire reached its height, the Zulu Kingdom had become one of the most powerful and influential forces in southern Africa. The kingdom's military strength was unmatched, and its reputation for both innovation and brutality had spread across the region. But this success also brought challenges. Shaka's growing power made him enemies, both inside and outside the kingdom. As his reign continued, internal dissent began to grow. Some of his closest allies, disillusioned by his harsh methods, began to conspire against him. Shaka's reign was beginning to take a toll on his mental and emotional health, and the once unshakable ruler found himself facing threats from within. The foundations of his empire, though strong, were beginning to crack. As Shaka's power grew, so did the complications of leadership. His strict rule, which had once inspired loyalty, began to breed discontent. His internal struggles, combined with the external threats he faced, signaled the beginning of a period of instability for the Zulu Kingdom. Despite the unrelenting pace of his conquest and the strength of his military, the cracks in Shaka's empire were beginning to show, and his internal conflicts would soon lead to the unraveling of his reign. Shaka's rise to power was characterized by a combination of military genius, innovation, and brutal tactics. He transformed the Zulu Kingdom from a fragmented tribal society into a unified, powerful force, capable of dominating southern Africa. But the same ambition and ruthlessness that fueled his rise would also lead to his eventual downfall. Shaka Zulu's rise to power was marked by immense violence, both in his external conquests and his internal dealings with his people. His ability to unify the Zulu people under his banner was not just a result of military prowess. It also stemmed from his willingness to impose extreme methods of control over both his subjects and his enemies. Shaka's reign was characterized by the creation of a deeply militarized society, where the discipline, loyalty, and obedience of the warriors were paramount. He revolutionized Zulu warfare, making it the cornerstone of his leadership, but he also demanded unwavering loyalty from his people, sometimes to the point of cruelty. His transformation of the Zulu Kingdom into a powerhouse was marked by ruthless efficiency, but the fear that it generated also sowed the seeds of future rebellion and dissent. Shaka's military successes during the early years of his reign were integral to his power. His conquests across southern Africa were swift and brutal, and he used both military genius and psychological warfare to defeat his enemies. The battlefield tactics that he pioneered, including the famous buffalo horns formation, were revolutionary. These strategies allowed Shaka's forces to strike fear into their enemies, as they were often overwhelmed by the precision and cohesion of the Zulu army. However, his military conquests were not just about fighting other tribes. They were also about transforming the way in which the Zulu people saw themselves. Shaka's victories over neighboring tribes demonstrated his military acumen and secured his place as the most powerful leader in the region. The fear that followed in the wake of these conquests helped to consolidate Shaka's power, ensuring that his enemies would be too intimidated to challenge him directly. Shaka's methods of conquest were brutal, and his reputation for cruelty spread far and wide. He sought not only to defeat his enemies, but to utterly humiliate them, breaking their spirits and ensuring that they would never rise against him. This was a crucial aspect of his military strategy, as it served to demoralize not only the defeated tribes, but also his own people. Shaka ruled with an iron fist, and those who defied him were often subjected to horrific punishment. He did not hesitate to use violence as a means of keeping his warriors in line, and he demanded absolute loyalty from those who served him. His military innovations, including the use of the short stabbing spear, the assegai, were designed not only for efficiency in battle, but also to instill fear in his enemies. Shaka's army was a symbol of his absolute control over his kingdom and his people. But it was not just Shaka's military tactics that were revolutionary. It was also his ability to manipulate fear and loyalty to maintain power. Shaka understood the power of intimidation, both on and off the battlefield. He made sure that his enemies knew the consequences of defying him, and he extended this same threat of violence to his own people. He demanded that his warriors be completely loyal to him, and those who failed to meet his expectations were swiftly punished or executed. This was a society built on fear and discipline, where any hint of disloyalty was met with swift retribution. The emotional intensity of Shaka's reign was tied to the climate of fear he cultivated, not just in his enemies, but in his own court. This sense of terror extended beyond the battlefield and into the very heart of the Zulu Kingdom. As Shaka's empire grew, so did his need to control every aspect of his society. He imposed strict rules on his warriors, requiring them to adhere to a rigid code of conduct that left little room for personal autonomy. The regimental structure of the Zulu army became the foundation of Shaka's rule, with each warrior answering only to him. Loyalty was not just a virtue, it was a requirement for survival. Shaka's transformation of the military was not just about creating a more effective fighting force. It was about creating a culture of submission to his will. His warriors were expected to be loyal not only in battle, but also in every aspect of their lives. This totalitarian approach to leadership extended to his control over his own family. Shaka's family members were subjected to the same rules of obedience, and those who failed to comply were punished. His relationship with his mother, Nandi, was a key aspect of his early years, but as he rose to power, Shaka became increasingly isolated from those who were closest to him. His intense focus on his vision for the Zulu Kingdom left little room for personal relationships, and those around him were often caught in the crossfire of his ruthless ambition. The internal struggles within Shaka's court were exacerbated by his increasingly erratic behavior. While his military genius remained intact, Shaka's mental and emotional state began to deteriorate as his reign progressed. The death of his mother, Nandi, in 1827 marked a turning point for Shaka, as he fell into a deep period of mourning that sent him into a downward spiral. His grief was so intense that it began to manifest in bizarre and violent behavior. Shaka's paranoia grew, and he began to suspect even his closest allies of treachery. He became increasingly tyrannical, relying on his army not only for external defense, but also to maintain control over his own people. His cruelty reached new heights as he ordered the execution of numerous people, including members of his own family, and subjected his kingdom to an era of bloodshed and terror. The emotional intensity of his reign began to shift from military triumphs to personal despair and madness, as Shaka's once unquestioned authority was undermined by his own inner turmoil. Shaka's personal grief over the death of his mother seemed to trigger a profound change in his behavior. His mourning led him to make erratic decisions, including a series of massacres and purges within his own court. The sense of fear that had once been a tool of his strength began to backfire, as his own warriors began to grow fearful of him rather than loyal to him. The brutality of Shaka's rule, which had once been an effective means of controlling his subjects, now seemed to push them to the brink. His army, which had once been a symbol of unity and power, was now plagued by divisions, with factions forming both within the military and within Shaka's own family. His inability to maintain the same level of control over his people as he had once done became evident, and the instability that followed marked the beginning of the end for his reign. The assassination of Shaka in 1828 was the inevitable result of this instability. His growing paranoia and cruelty had alienated even those who had once been closest to him. The plot to kill Shaka was carried out by his half-brothers, Dingaan and Mlangana, who saw his erratic behavior as a threat to their own positions of power. The assassination marked the culmination of years of internal strife and discontent within Shaka's kingdom. It was the tragic end to a reign that had been built on the foundations of fear and brutality. The emotional intensity of Shaka's death was not just the result of his military genius, but also the culmination of his personal tragedies, as the power that had once seemed unshakable finally crumbled under the weight of his own emotional and psychological breakdown. Shaka's death left a power vacuum within the Zulu Kingdom, and his assassination marked the beginning of a period of political instability. His death did not immediately end the Zulu Empire's dominance in southern Africa, but it did set in motion a series of events that would weaken the kingdom in the years to come. The transition of power from Shaka to his successor, Dingaan, was fraught with tension and violence, as the new ruler struggled to maintain control over the kingdom Shaka had built. The emotional fallout from Shaka's death lingered for years, as the legacy of his reign continued to cast a long shadow over the Zulu people. Shaka's reign left a complex legacy. His military innovations and unification of the Zulu people were remarkable achievements that made the Zulu Kingdom one of the most powerful in southern Africa. However, his methods of rule, marked by cruelty, paranoia, and personal turmoil, also left a legacy of fear and instability. Shaka's story is one of triumph and tragedy, a tale of a leader who rose from obscurity to build an empire, only to see it collapse under the weight of his own inner demons. His reign was defined by both the brilliance of his military strategies and the devastating toll of his personal struggles. The emotional intensity of Shaka's story lies not just in his rise and fall as a conqueror, but in the tragic consequences of his own ambition and personal loss. As Shaka Zulu continued his reign, the effects of his internal struggles became increasingly evident. The outward signs of his growing paranoia and emotional instability were mirrored by a series of increasingly erratic and destructive decisions that began to undermine the very empire he had worked so hard to build. Shaka's military genius, once the defining characteristic of his rule, was now overshadowed by his deepening personal despair. The death of his mother, Nandi, in 1827, marked a turning point in his mental and emotional state, which ultimately led to his self-destructive tendencies. His grief over her death was so overwhelming that it spiraled into a series of decisions that weakened his position as the king of the Zulu Kingdom. Shaka's mourning was intense, but the grief he experienced after Nandi's passing went far beyond the expected sorrow. His reaction was marked by an obsessive need for control to the point of becoming irrational. Shaka's increasing unpredictability caused fear among his closest allies and his warriors. His once unquestioned authority was now called into question, as even his most loyal followers began to notice that something was amiss. His usual methods of maintaining discipline, fear, brutality, and unyielding power began to have the opposite effect. Where they had once inspired loyalty and respect, they now elicited resentment and anxiety. The result was a growing sense of instability within the kingdom, one that could no longer be contained by sheer force alone. The kingdom that Shaka had built was founded on the principles of military strength and obedience. However, the emotional toll of his actions began to crack the foundation of his empire. His increasing cruelty, which had once been a means to keep enemies and even his own people in line, now caused fractures within his ranks. The warriors who had once fought with unflinching loyalty began to question the sanity of their king. Shaka's paranoia intensified, and he began to suspect that even his closest confidants were conspiring against him. This growing distrust further alienated him from the people around him and turned his court into a volatile and dangerous environment. It was not just the warriors who were affected by Shaka's mental deterioration. His family, too, felt the weight of his instability. His relationship with his siblings became increasingly strained. Shaka, once the favored son of his father, had isolated himself from the very people who had supported him during his rise. His internal strife led him to turn on his family, subjecting them to the same brutal treatment that he had once reserved for his enemies. He began to view his family members as potential threats to his reign rather than sources of support. This growing paranoia, coupled with his violent and erratic behavior, alienated the very people who had helped him seize power in the first place. The increasing tension and instability within Shaka's court were the direct result of his changing leadership style. While he had once demanded absolute loyalty and maintained a strict sense of discipline among his warriors, his rule had now become marked by inconsistency and cruelty. His refusal to listen to the counsel of his trusted advisors and his increasing detachment from reality created an atmosphere of fear and distrust. Those who had once revered Shaka for his brilliance on the battlefield now saw him as a volatile, dangerous figure. This shift in perception was the beginning of the cracks that would ultimately bring down his reign. As Shaka's mental state deteriorated, the fear that had once served as the glue holding his empire together began to unravel. His increasingly erratic behavior resulted in a growing sense of instability, both within the Zulu Kingdom and across southern Africa. Once revered as a powerful and strategic military leader, Shaka was now seen as a tyrant whose reign was marked by paranoia and brutality. His warriors, once loyal and unyielding, began to question whether their king was truly fit to rule. This uncertainty within the ranks of the Zulu military created an opening for dissent, both within the kingdom and beyond. His enemies, who had once feared his wrath, began to see an opportunity to strike back. The empire Shaka had built was now at risk of collapsing from within. The emotional turmoil that Shaka experienced after the death of his mother was not just a personal tragedy. It was a pivotal moment in the larger narrative of his reign. His reaction to her death, far from being a temporary period of grief, marked the beginning of a prolonged period of instability that would weaken the very core of the Zulu Kingdom. Shaka's inability to cope with his loss led him to make decisions that were more about his own sense of power than the welfare of his people. He continued to demand loyalty and obedience from his warriors, but the fear that had once been the foundation of his rule was no longer enough to maintain control. His emotional fragility had created a situation in which his own authority was being questioned, and the kingdom he had built began to crumble under the weight of his personal demons. Despite the growing unrest within the kingdom, Shaka's military campaigns continued, though they were no longer as effective as they once were. His mental state had affected his ability to lead on the battlefield, and his once dependable military strategies began to falter. His forces, which had once been a well-oiled machine, were now suffering from internal divisions and lack of cohesion. While Shaka's warriors were still formidable, the unity that had once defined them was no longer present. The empire that Shaka had built on the strength of his military innovations and strategic brilliance was beginning to lose its edge. The external threats that had once seemed insignificant in the face of Shaka's military prowess now appeared more formidable, and the Zulu Kingdom was starting to feel the weight of its internal instability. The fear that Shaka had cultivated for so long was now a double-edged sword. While it had once kept his enemies at bay, it had also alienated those closest to him. The very same fear that had made him an unstoppable force was now the catalyst for his downfall. The emotional climate in the kingdom had shifted from one of fierce loyalty and respect to one of anxiety and distrust. Shaka's inability to maintain the same level of control that he had once commanded had begun to undermine the loyalty of his warriors. His reliance on terror, once a powerful tool, was now driving his closest allies to question his leadership. As the instability within Shaka's kingdom continued to escalate, the possibility of rebellion became more likely. Shaka's mental state and the growing unrest among his people left the kingdom vulnerable to internal betrayal. His paranoia had reached such extremes that he began to view even his most loyal supporters as potential traitors. This deep mistrust made it increasingly difficult for him to retain control over his empire. Shaka's tragic decline from the visionary leader who had united the Zulu people to the paranoid tyrant who could not maintain control of his own kingdom is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the emotional toll of leadership. The emotional intensity of his reign, once driven by military triumph and strategic brilliance, now stemmed from his personal torment and the unraveling of his once great empire. Shaka's inability to cope with his personal losses and the growing disillusionment among his people ultimately led to the collapse of his empire. His reign, which had been marked by fear, loyalty, and military innovation, was now defined by instability and betrayal. His increasing cruelty and erratic behavior created an atmosphere of fear and distrust, both within his inner circle and among the general population. The very foundation of his power, his ability to inspire fear and loyalty, was no longer enough to sustain his rule. The emotional toll of his personal tragedies, compounded by his erratic leadership, had sown the seeds of his own destruction. The tragic end of Shaka Zulu serves as a reminder of the complexities of power and the way in which personal loss can profoundly affect the course of history. The once great leader, who had forged an empire from the ashes of fragmented tribes, was now a broken figure, consumed by his own emotional demons. His fall from power marked the end of an era for the Zulu Kingdom and set the stage for the tumultuous period that would follow in the wake of his death. Shaka Zulu's reign, while initially marked by military triumphs and the consolidation of power, began to deteriorate as his emotional and psychological struggles deepened. As his kingdom expanded and his influence grew, so did the pressures of maintaining control over a vast territory and diverse people. The internal conflicts that began to plague his leadership came to the forefront as Shaka faced not only external threats, but also an erosion of the trust and loyalty he had carefully cultivated within his own ranks. The kingdom he had built through years of brutal conquest and innovative military strategies was now at risk of collapsing due to the very nature of his leadership. The death of his mother, Nandi, in 1827 was a turning point for Shaka, marking the beginning of a period of intense personal grief that would soon evolve into destructive paranoia. Nandi had been Shaka's closest confidant and a source of emotional support, and her passing left a profound void in his life. Her death triggered an overwhelming sense of loss, and Shaka's emotional collapse began soon after. Instead of using his grief as a way to solidify his leadership, Shaka's response was increasingly erratic. He became consumed by grief and anger, directing his sorrow outward in a violent and unpredictable manner. What had once been a kingdom driven by strict discipline and fear now became a place where the rulers and the ruled alike were held captive by a mounting sense of dread. His behavior, once revered as part of his powerful leadership, now seemed like the actions of a man unable to cope with the burdens of his own humanity. As Shaka's emotional state worsened, he turned inward, growing distrustful of those closest to him. His advisors, generals, and even family members became the targets of his suspicions. Shaka's court, once a place of respect and fear, became a tense environment where even the slightest misstep could lead to brutal retribution. His growing paranoia led him to see conspiracies everywhere, and those who had once been loyal to him found themselves vulnerable to his wrath. Shaka's need to maintain control over every aspect of his kingdom drove him to make decisions that further alienated those who had helped him rise to power. The very people who had been integral to his military success were now either cast aside or executed under the suspicion that they might be plotting against him. This shift in leadership style created a climate of fear that grew ever more oppressive. The once disciplined and unified Zulu army began to show signs of internal fracture. Shaka's military tactics, which had once been effective in consolidating his power, now began to falter. His warriors, who had once fought with unwavering loyalty, began to question their king's ability to lead them to victory. The psychological toll of Shaka's paranoia and cruelty was now taking its toll on his soldiers, who were torn between their loyalty to the king and their growing fear of his unpredictable behavior. Shaka's obsession with maintaining absolute control over the military, combined with his increasing cruelty, made it difficult for him to retain the support of his warriors. The foundation of his power, built on fear and military discipline, was slowly eroding. Despite his internal struggles, Shaka's military campaigns continued, but they were no longer as successful as they had once been. His forces, once a symbol of strength and unity, were now plagued by internal strife and division. The empire Shaka had built through conquest and innovation was beginning to fracture. While Shaka's reputation as a formidable leader still struck fear into his enemies, his grip on the Zulu Kingdom was weakening. The external threats that had once been insignificant in the face of his military genius were now gaining ground, as Shaka's resources were stretched thin. His leadership, once a unifying force, had now become a source of division. The same intensity and discipline that had built the Zulu Kingdom were now causing it to crumble. Shaka's cruelty, which had once been a tool for maintaining control, now turned against him. His harsh treatment of both his warriors and subjects created a cycle of resentment and fear that no longer kept his kingdom united. Those who had once fought for Shaka now sought ways to undermine his authority. The emotional and psychological toll of Shaka's leadership was visible not only in his strained relationships with his military, but also in his relationship with his family. His brothers, who had initially supported him during his rise to power, began to see his behavior as increasingly erratic and dangerous. The tension within the royal family grew as Shaka became more paranoid, seeing enemies in every shadow. His rule, which had been unchallenged for so long, was now facing internal rebellion. Shaka's paranoia and emotional turmoil eventually led to the culmination of the internal conflict that had been brewing within his court. His brothers, Dingain and Mlangana, who had grown increasingly disillusioned with Shaka's leadership, saw an opportunity to end his reign. The tension between Shaka and his family reached a breaking point, and a plot to assassinate the king was set in motion. Shaka's downfall was as swift and violent as his rise had been, and the once great king was assassinated by his own family members in 1828. The emotional intensity of Shaka's assassination was not only the result of the actions of his own kin, but also of the culmination of years of psychological strain. The very kingdom he had fought to create was now in the hands of his enemies, and his reign ended not with the triumph of military conquest, but with the destruction of the very things that had once made him great. Shaka's assassination marked the end of an era for the Zulu Kingdom. His death left a power vacuum that plunged the kingdom into chaos. Dingain, Shaka's brother, succeeded him as king, but the instability caused by Shaka's reign of terror and the subsequent betrayal by his family led to internal strife that would last for years. The kingdom that Shaka had built, though powerful, was not built to withstand the kind of internal division that followed his death. His empire, which had once seemed invincible, began to unravel in the wake of his assassination. The emotional toll of his leadership, combined with the betrayal by his own family, led to the eventual fragmentation of the Zulu Kingdom. Despite the collapse of Shaka's empire, his legacy as a military innovator and unifier of the Zulu people remains a defining aspect of African history. His military strategies, such as the buffalo horns formation and the use of the assegai, revolutionized warfare in southern Africa. His ability to unite the disparate tribes of the region under a single banner made him a powerful figure, and his influence continued to be felt long after his death. However, Shaka's legacy is also marred by the brutal methods he employed to maintain control over his people. The emotional intensity of his reign, marked by both brilliant military achievements and personal tragedy, has ensured that his story is one of the most complex and compelling in African history. Shaka's rise and fall are emblematic of the dangers of unchecked power and the psychological toll that leadership can take. His reign was defined by an unrelenting pursuit of dominance and control, but it was also marred by personal loss and emotional instability. Shaka's failure to manage his grief and his increasing paranoia ultimately led to his downfall. The empire he had built, one that had once seemed invincible, collapsed under the weight of his personal struggles. Shaka's death, though the result of betrayal by his own family, was the inevitable conclusion of a reign that had been built on fear, loyalty, and violence. His story serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the complexities of power and leadership. His legacy, both as a conqueror and as a ruler consumed by his own inner demons, continues to resonate in the annals of history. The death of Shaka Zulu, which marked the end of his reign, represented not just the fall of an individual, but the disintegration of an entire era for the Zulu Kingdom. Shaka's empire, forged through years of brutal conquest and strategic brilliance, was left in chaos following his assassination. The kingdom that had once been united under Shaka's leadership was now divided, vulnerable, and on the brink of internal collapse. His brothers, Dingain and Mlangana, who had once been loyal to him, found themselves caught in the political turmoil of succession. As Dingain took control of the throne, the emotional and psychological landscape of the kingdom shifted dramatically, with the legacies of both Shaka's greatness and his reign of terror lingering in the air. Dingain's ascent to the throne was fraught with challenges. Shaka's death had created a power vacuum that allowed internal divisions within the Zulu Kingdom to surface. Shaka's ruthless methods of governance and the fear he had instilled in his warriors and subjects left a kingdom that was not prepared for a transition of power. Dingain, though his half-brother, had never been in a position of power before and was forced to navigate the same complicated web of alliances, loyalty, and distrust that had characterized Shaka's rule. His own approach to leadership would be tested almost immediately, as the very foundations of Shaka's empire had been built on fear, coercion, and military dominance. Dingain's early attempts to consolidate power faced resistance from multiple fronts. Many of the Zulu warriors who had fought under Shaka, loyal to their king through fear and respect, found themselves torn between their loyalty to the fallen ruler and their new king. Dingain, while not as innovative or as militarily brilliant as Shaka, had a clear goal: to maintain the power that had been left in his hands. However, the emotional legacy of Shaka's reign was one of terror and division, and Dingain was not immune to the same challenges that had led to his brother's downfall. As Shaka's empire was slowly crumbling, Dingain was forced to contend with both external threats and internal insurrection. Shaka's military reforms had transformed the Zulu Kingdom into a fearsome fighting force, but they had also created a system in which loyalty to the king, rather than to the people or the kingdom itself, was paramount. The Zulu army was a powerful tool, but it was also a double-edged sword. Shaka had demanded loyalty at all costs, and this unyielding demand for obedience created an environment in which dissent was not tolerated. His paranoia had led him to alienate those closest to him, and this distrust now extended to Dingain's rule. Shaka's innovations in military tactics, which had once allowed the Zulu Kingdom to expand its territory and influence, were now a burden, as the warriors who had once respected their king began to question the legitimacy of Dingain's reign. The loyalty that had been fostered through fear now turned into resentment, as many of Shaka's former allies and generals saw Dingain as unfit to lead. In the midst of this instability, Dingain's reign became marked by bloodshed and conflict. One of the first major crises Dingain faced was the war with the Voortrekkers, a group of Dutch-speaking settlers from a Cape colony. The Voortrekkers, seeking land and independence, had crossed into Zulu territory and were met with resistance. Dingain's response was swift and brutal. He ordered the massacre of a group of Voortrekker settlers at the Battle of Blood River in 1838, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of settlers. This event, however, would have lasting consequences both for Dingain's reign and for the future of the Zulu Kingdom. The Battle of Blood River was a significant turning point, as it marked the beginning of a long and bloody struggle between the Zulu Kingdom and the European settlers. While Dingain's victory in this battle temporarily secured his power, it also solidified the conflict between the Zulu and European forces, which would continue for decades to come. Internally, Dingain faced continued resistance from those who had been loyal to Shaka. Many of Shaka's former generals and warriors, disillusioned by the brutality of his reign and the subsequent rise of his brother, began to challenge Dingain's authority. The Zulu Kingdom, once unified under Shaka's vision, was now fragmented, with various factions vying for power. The political instability caused by the transition of power was compounded by the external threats from the European settlers and neighboring tribes. While Dingain tried to maintain Shaka's legacy and hold on to the kingdom, his rule was marked by internal divisions and constant challenges to his authority. The emotional legacy of Shaka's reign continued to haunt the Zulu Kingdom long after his death. His brutal methods of leadership had left a deep imprint on the psyche of his people, and his assassination created a vacuum of power that led to a fractured, unstable kingdom. The Zulu warriors who had fought so fiercely for Shaka were now torn between loyalty to the fallen king and their loyalty to the new ruler. The fear and respect that had once bound the kingdom together were now replaced by suspicion and doubt. The emotional toll of Shaka's reign, combined with the traumatic events that followed his death, left the Zulu people in a state of uncertainty. As Dinganes struggled to hold on to power, the emotional intensity of the kingdom was defined by its fragmentation. Shaka's military innovations, which had once made the Zulu Kingdom an unstoppable force, were now being questioned. The strength of the Zulu army, once a symbol of unity and power, was now undermined by the divisions within the ranks. The Zulu people, who had once followed Shaka's orders without question, were now divided in their loyalties and uncertain about the future. The emotional burden of living under the shadow of Shaka's rule, combined with the fear of the unknown under Dingane's leadership, created a sense of tension and instability that pervaded every aspect of Zulu society. Dingane's reign, while marked by initial military successes, ultimately failed to restore the unity and strength that Shaka had built. The emotional and psychological toll of Shaka's leadership, with its emphasis on fear, loyalty, and brutality, had left the kingdom unable to function without constant conflict. The emotional intensity of the Zulu Kingdom's struggle for stability mirrored the emotional turmoil of its rulers. Shaka's death, which had brought hope for change, instead heralded a period of instability and division. The legacy of Shaka's reign, with all its power and terror, was one that Dingane could not escape. His reign, while marked by military victories, was overshadowed by the trauma of Shaka's rule and the fracturing of the kingdom. The eventual fall of Dingane and the subsequent rise of his brother, Mpande, further illustrated the instability that had come to define the Zulu Kingdom after Shaka's death. Mpande, although less ambitious and more diplomatic than his brothers, was unable to restore the unity that had once characterized Shaka's reign. The emotional legacy of Shaka's power continued to haunt the Zulu Kingdom, as the scars of his rule remained deeply embedded in the people and the military. Even after Shaka's death, his influence persisted, and the emotional and psychological aftermath of his reign continued to shape the course of Zulu history. The Zulu Kingdom, while still a powerful force in southern Africa, was forever altered by the emotional intensity and destructive nature of Shaka's rule. Shaka Zulu's reign, although it ended with his tragic assassination, left an indelible mark on the history of southern Africa. His empire, while brief in comparison to other great historical empires, was unparalleled in terms of the changes it brought to the region. Shaka's military innovations, organizational brilliance, and the sheer scale of his conquests reshaped the way the Zulu people saw themselves and how they interacted with neighboring tribes. However, Shaka's rule also sowed the seeds of destruction. His leadership, which relied heavily on fear, loyalty, and an unforgiving use of power, was ultimately unsustainable. His emotional instability, exacerbated by personal loss, fractured the unity of his people and set the stage for internal strife that would destabilize the kingdom for years to come. Following Shaka's assassination, the kingdom of the Zulu faced a period of intense political upheaval. His brothers, Dingane and Mlangana, who had long been overshadowed by Shaka's towering presence, now found themselves grappling for power. The dynamics of the Zulu court became a battlefield of conflicting ambitions. Dingane, having played a key role in his brother's assassination, was the immediate beneficiary of the power vacuum left by Shaka's death. However, Dingane's rise to the throne was not without significant challenges. His legitimacy as king was questioned, and the emotional weight of Shaka's reign loomed large over his rule. While Dingane initially attempted to maintain Shaka's military legacy, he lacked the charisma and strategic brilliance that had characterized his brother's leadership. As a result, Dingane's rule quickly became marred by internal divisions and rising dissatisfaction among the Zulu people and military. Dingane's leadership style was markedly different from Shaka's. While Shaka had relied on fear and brute force to consolidate his power, Dingane sought to maintain control through a more cautious approach. However, his inability to establish the same kind of fearsome loyalty among his warriors and subjects left him vulnerable. The emotional toll of living under the shadow of Shaka's reign began to affect the very fabric of the kingdom. Shaka's use of violence to maintain order had created an environment in which loyalty was based on fear rather than respect or a shared vision for the future. This kind of leadership, while effective in the short term, was not sustainable in the long run, and Dingain struggled to command the same kind of obedience that his brother had enjoyed. One of Dingain's first major tests as king was the growing resistance to his rule within the Zulu military. Many of Shaka's most loyal generals and warriors, who had been instrumental in building the empire, felt alienated by Dingain's more cautious approach. They were accustomed to the strict discipline and unyielding command of Shaka, and Dingain's failure to assert himself in the same way led to growing disillusionment. The military, once the backbone of Shaka's rule, now became a source of instability. Loyalty within the ranks began to fray, and the emotional bond that had held the kingdom together started to disintegrate. Compounding Dingain's difficulties was the external threat posed by the European settlers, specifically the Voortrekkers, who had begun migrating into Zulu territory. The Voortrekkers, Dutch-speaking settlers from the Cape Colony, were determined to establish their own independent republics and were met with fierce resistance from Zulu. The relationship between the Zulu Kingdom and the Voortrekkers quickly deteriorated, culminating in the Battle of Blood River in 1838. In this battle, Dingain's forces faced off against the Voortrekkers, who were armed with firearms and mounted on horses. Despite their superior weaponry, the Voortrekkers managed to inflict a devastating defeat on the Zulu forces. Dingain's leadership was called into question, and the loss of the battle signaled the beginning of a period of decline for the Zulu Kingdom. The aftermath of the Battle of Blood River was a turning point in the Zulu Kingdom's history. The defeat exposed the weaknesses in Dingain's leadership and highlighted the vulnerability of the Zulu Kingdom to external threats. The emotional trauma of the battle, combined with the growing unrest within the kingdom, left Dingain in a precarious position. His authority was undermined not only by the defeat, but also by the increasing alienation of his own people. The emotional and psychological toll of Shaka's reign, which had been built on the foundations of fear and terror, had left the kingdom in a state of disarray. The warriors who had once fought with unwavering loyalty were now divided and uncertain, and Dingain found himself struggling to maintain control over the very forces that had once made the Zulu Kingdom a formidable power in southern Africa. The emotional legacy of Shaka's reign also played a significant role in the rise of internal rebellion against Dingain. As the king's authority weakened, factions within the Zulu royal family began to vie for power. Shaka's assassination, while initially seen as a necessary step to secure Dingain's rule, set in motion a series of betrayals and rivalries that would plague the Zulu Kingdom for years. The political instability created by these power struggles further undermined Dingain's reign. His inability to unite the kingdom, both militarily and politically, left him vulnerable to both internal and external threats. Despite his attempts to consolidate power, Dingain's reign was ultimately short-lived. The internal divisions within the Zulu Kingdom, combined with the external pressures from European settlers and neighboring tribes, left Dingain unable to hold onto the throne. His eventual downfall came at the hands of his brother Mpand, who had long been a rival to Dingain. Mpand, who had remained largely in the background during Shaka's reign, saw an opportunity to seize the throne for himself. With the support of key factions within the kingdom, Mpand overthrew Dingain and took control of the Zulu Kingdom. The emotional toll of the power struggle was immense, and the Zulu Kingdom, once united under Shaka, was now fractured and vulnerable. Mpand's reign, though marked by greater political stability than Dingain's, was still burdened by the legacy of Shaka's rule. While Mpand was more diplomatic and less prone to violence than his brothers, he faced the challenge of maintaining unity in a kingdom that had been torn apart by years of conflict. The emotional scars of Shaka's reign, with its emphasis on fear and loyalty, remained deeply embedded in the Zulu psyche. The Zulu people, though united under Mpand's rule, could not forget the trauma of Shaka's brutal reign, and the kingdom remained politically unstable for years after his death. The emotional impact of Shaka's rule on the Zulu Kingdom cannot be overstated. His rise to power, based on military innovation, fear, and ruthless leadership, left the kingdom with a legacy that was as destructive as it was transformative. Shaka's assassination and the subsequent power struggles within the Zulu royal family created an environment of distrust and instability that lasted for generations. The emotional intensity of Shaka's reign, coupled with the political and military challenges faced by his successors, ensured that the Zulu Kingdom would never fully recover from the trauma of his leadership. While Shaka's military innovations and empire building were significant achievements, the emotional and psychological costs of his rule left the Zulu Kingdom fractured and divided, a shadow of its former power. As time passed, the Zulu Kingdom would continue to face internal strife and external threats.